I'd now like to introduce to you Michelle Sault from Minokaw Consulting, who will present an overview of the 2021 regional engagement with Ontario First Nations MMIWG families and survivors. So please, Michelle, whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Yeah, Courtney, miigwech to Donna, our elder, for that beautiful opening. And miigwech to both Anna Betty and Glenn for your opening remarks. I really appreciate that. And Marian Jacko, a legend. So ani everyone, Anishinaabe Kwe, Ganishnikas, Wamoki Kwe, Dojaba, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Kino Dodum. I'm a helper. I'm here to represent the many, many people who fed into this document. We were guided by the First Nations Women's Council in the direction. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But I want to take a moment to say my thanks as well to the families and survivors who morphed into advisors. That was a really important piece of this work, was to ensure that those who came to those sessions that fed into and created this report, those advisors are co-creators, and we captured their intentions, their hopes, and their wishes for this document. I want to thank my co-collaborator, Dr. Shannon Speed, who supported me by showing up at every single session, whether it was in the North or the South. She took diligent notes. She helped synthesize, analyze, and write this beautiful report. And I'm really proud of this report. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the alignments that come into this report and the reason why this report has a bit of a different slant. And I think Ontario region, or Ontario and Ontario families and survivors, can be very proud of this document because it's very clean, it's very clear, and very directional. I want to thank the Women's Council. I've come to my work very honestly and been working in this sector for approximately 12 years now. So thank you very much to all those women who trusted in us to get this strategy prepared. Nancy, I want to say thank you for your keen eye and your continued support as we were bringing iteration after iteration forward. To Sandy Montour, an amazing woman and leader, the leader of Aboriginal Shelters of Ontario, an organization that I have been working alongside of for 12 years now, who recommended my work to the council, continue to inspire me. Sandy and Cora, who co-chaired the Ontario's response to MMIWG, and for whom the title of this document, Decolonizing Systems and Planting Seeds, was because of them that they inspired the title. To Lindia Jones, who reminded me very, very early on, India, who represents independent First Nations in this province and has done so for many, many years, and is a true strategist in and of herself and the work that she does. And she reminded me early on, this is a strategy. This is not a storytelling document. This is not a document where we are bearing witness. This is a strategy that needs to feed into a strategy. So keeping that in mind, this entire document was built around that premise. And to Barb General and her colleagues who helped support her in creating this session, where everybody, this entire week, where everyone that is on here has a connection to this work in some way, shape, or form. Those are my thanks. And I want to back the truck up for a moment here and say, through this process, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. Then I'll tell you what I told you. Okay. In order to do that, I need to tell you how the agenda will flow for me, what I'd like to do, and how I intend to get some impact through this session. So what I generally do, I'm a facilitator. I guide process. I help support the development of strategies, programs, services. It does not matter what it is. If I have a group of individuals who have this in their wheelhouse, I can guide them and support them to their end. I create the pathway. So I want to tell you about the pathway that I created in order for this document to come to life. I want to tell you about the end game when we were pulling it all together, and how this epiphany came where I saw an opportunity to create alignments. So I'm hoping that some of you or all of you have had an opportunity to look at the document itself. It's a beautiful document, and the process that flows from that came from the work of those families and survivors who came forward. I talked a little bit about, I want to back the truck up for a moment to share a little bit about the work that I've done in Canada around MMIWG, just to help support, I guess, the legitimacy and how it is that I came to this work. I did start working in 2010 with Indigenous shelters in Ontario on and off reserve who came together. The whole premise of that gathering was around the Department of Justice was providing grants at the time. We gathered the women together. And at that time, even saying the word murder was shocking. I remember that session when we were talking about missing and murdered women, and that was specifically a gendered discussion at the time. And it was shocking to begin that discussion. It was very difficult to move through that session, but it was the beginning of really being able to say out loud those things that make us uncomfortable. I continued my work with MMIWG, family violence, human trafficking, and so on. And I was called to do some work in Vancouver with a pre-inquiry work with the three ministers who were still looking for the commissioners at that time. And I went to work with the women who were marching in downtown Vancouver, who had been calling for this inquiry for so long. And I was very honored to do the work there. They embraced me and protected me and supported me through that entire session. It was very, very difficult. It was about 120 people in the room. And it began this process in connection to MMIWG that I am very proud to continue to do. This particular work with the caucus began with a blank page, essentially. I'm handed a responsibility that I willingly accept. And I take that responsibility and I say, okay, oh my goodness. Marion mentioned the 231 calls for justice. And I remember when the calls for justice came out, I was so proud of the commissioners for having really listened and not to say, okay, we're going to synthesize this out and we're going to move this and we're only going to have 50. They went with 231 and said, figure it out, Canada. Figure it out, allies. Figure it out, frontline workers. Figure it out, government. Figure it out, chiefs and councils. So what did we do? I want to start with the blank page idea. And essentially what we did was we worked in virtual circle. So inviting people into a safe place and asking them to become advisors to a process that would feed into the national report, which incidentally became breathing life into the calls for justice, which I think is a beautiful title. And that's what we're all doing, is trying to breathe life into these calls for justice. So this is what Ontario's families said. What are we looking for? A concrete action plan rooted in families first. This is what the council asked us to do. They said, we want the families to tell us what the solutions are and not necessarily those who are frontline workers. Though I can say that through the sessions themselves, people appeared to be both. We didn't ask them specifically. If it came out in their stories that they had a family member or a loved one that was missing or murdered, they would share that. So we have a families first solutions approach, and we honor the words of your former Ontario Regional Chief, Roseanne Archibald, who is now poised in Ontario. You have the national leader to help move, shift, advocate on your behalf some of the work that came out of this plan. So this is essentially just called right out of the national call for justice. And what we're looking for is this national action plan, which is what AFN is working on and what we are feeding into. One of the things I'll call attention to in this presentation is the words of your regional chief, Glenn Hare, who said, we intend to bring your words to the federal government. And I would think also to any other government that has an interest in the work that you do, an interest in the work of helping families, an interest in the work in helping survivors. So this is a little bit of the data, the background. We had 66 unique stories in total. The advisors to the report all came to the circles in an honest way and in a willing way. Some were frustrated with the continuation of asking what they want when they told you 10 times ago. We already know that a lot of what came out in this report has been validated by other reports, by other opportunities where people have come into circle to share their story. And whether it was explicitly stated, this is what we want, they have told us what they want through their stories, through their desires, through their wants. And health and well-being is absolutely that which they want for themselves and for their families. Peace for their loved ones who have crossed the veil, and peace for those that are left behind to pick up those pieces. And they want respect from the government for the things that they are asking for, which in most cases are so simple and so lacking. These gaps are here and they're evident, and not necessarily for mainstream society, but for us they are. So I keep noting this, that advisors were informed that they were there to become advisors. And I thought that that alone was really an interesting and supportive brain hack, I guess, or mind shift from, okay, I'm not just here just to tell my story, which is, there was room for that in a safe space to create relationships amongst the groups that came together. But what we wanted to do was really mine them for their wants, needs, and so on, in order to shape the all of the recommendations that came out. So again, I'm handed 231 recommendations and the potential for, 10 virtual sessions across the province with the hope to come up with a strategy. So what I did was I really thought about how to achieve this online. This is difficult. We've already had a couple of folks mention, we're here. I'm in my basement right now, wishing I was with all of you in circle in a big, gigantic ballroom that we, Chiefs of Ontario has rented with a sacred fire burning outside and a chance to hug you and a chance to see your faces and a chance to share a coffee out in the lobby. But because I can't do that, we're just going to, we'll do it this way. What we did was I looked at discussion clusters. I looked at the headers in the report and I thought, okay, let's approach this from a standpoint of let's cluster culture as a discussion. And let's look at some of those challenges, criticisms, or gaps that are evident for us as we look for culture in our programs and services or government responses. Let's take a look then at health and wellness, at justice, at human security. And then the last one, to which I believe we have the least influence as a PTO or as anyone, I guess, anyone. We don't have a lot of influence over industries and institutions, those things that we wish to decolonize. That's absolutely where we need to put our efforts in as well. The way that I saw this report was one whereby our chiefs could fight and advocate on our behalf, whereby frontline and leaders of organizations could look at this and say, there's an idea. That's a wonderful thing. We want to action that. Or whereby individuals who are working in justice, any organizations in the hospital system, for example, could look at this and be reminded once again what families need and want in order for them to find equilibrium and health and wellness. Some of the key points I had already mentioned, that the council asked us to ensure that this was a families first and survivors first approach. It was. Those solutions will be community-based, trauma-informed, and have protocol attached. And you'll see throughout my slide deck is really a bunch of bullet points. The report itself is more informative. And finally, this third bullet, intergenerational trauma and healing, the investment into mental health and social programs. I was present yesterday with just under 100 of you. It was a wonderful day yesterday, and the film was amazing. I love it. It was created as a tool to support families so that they can move forward with confidence in their advocacy and or fear, the fear that might strike us when a loved one goes missing. So that film, you weren't there yesterday, please take the time to watch it because it is very informative, and it's something you may want to share with your clients or colleagues in the future who are not here What we know, one of the speakers after the film, she asked a question and she said, you know, I keep seeing over and over again ceremony being mentioned, ceremony, doing ceremony, doing ceremony, doing ceremony after we've lost our loved one. And she said, what about doing ceremony before as a, I'll say the word prevention. I'm not sure if she said the word prevention, but that's certainly what I heard. And I think what you'll see, if that speaker is on the call today, that these strategic directions all include prevention. And that was a really important point that came out here. This is not about the after, this is the before and the during where we are today. So what I'm going to do is quickly go through each of these key sections. And I'm going to ask you, if you have a pen, what I'd like to do is really help out the organizers and Chiefs of Ontario today to get a sense from all of you where your priorities are. What you'll see in the document itself is a couple of things. So each of these bullets, there's 4 specific alignments to all of them. Okay, so I want to take you through each of the alignments. The very first thing we look for, we did not ask any of the advisors that came forward to read the pathways to safety, for example, which had come out in tandem with what we were doing. So it had come out near the end of us wrapping up the sessions. We didn't ask them to read the calls for justice. That it's a very lengthy document, but we didn't ask them to go through it. If they already have, that's terrific. At that point in time, we did not ask them to even look at the breathing life into the calls for justice. We were feeding into that evergreen document. So it was released before our document was released. And that document from the Assembly of First Nations will embed this Ontario's response in the document itself. So what we did was we stepped back, we listened to each of the advisors and we said, okay, they would like community-led initiatives. We want to know first and foremost, does the calls for justice hold that up? And it does. So we looked for those key narratives in the calls for justice that would hold this key strategic direction up. The next thing we did was we searched through the pathways to safety and we looked for anything that would align with community-led initiatives. And finally, breathing life into the calls for justice. So each one of these bullet points, you will see there is a narrative attached, which looks at the advisor's vision related to it, any perceived challenges they thought might come our way, and indicators of success. We went one step further. And there are those of you who are on the line that I know fed into the creating new pathways for data initiative that was federally led. And we wanted to honor the work that you did in that development of that data collection tool and those insights. And we know that that tool is also an evergreen document and will evolve. But we looked for alignments so that when this and any one of these strategic directions has had life breathed into it and comes to life or is augmented, because we know there is a lot of good work already happening in Ontario. We did look for those indicators of success as well, because evaluation has become an absolute in all the work that we do. And evaluation, although for some it is heart-stopping conversation, it seems complex, but really it's not. I believe that evaluation is an opportunity to stop, assess where you are, take a look at what you've done, shift if you need to, better some of the systems or approaches if you need to, put things to bed if you need to, and grow. It's also a validating exercise for those who want to invest in the initiatives, programs, or services that one might have an interest in creating. Let's go through very quickly. I'll just continue to get you to move. Don't move yet. So I'm going to do a top 3 exercise with y'all and ask you if you could just in order of preference, please, as I go through each of these slides, I'd like you to type in your top 3. And while you don't have the narrative that's attached to each of these, I think they're very clear. The other thing that's interesting and important is that what you have to say related to these, or your interpretation of what language and education might mean in terms of mitigating or creating a safe, mitigating somebody's safety to create a safer place. What does that mean for you? You don't have to note that, but it'll be important when those are bringing these programs to life, it comes to life in your own communities in a way that makes sense for you and the things that you wish to see in order to try and circumvent any tragedies or challenges that occur. This is also a tool for you, frontline workers, leaders of organizations, to say, this is what Ontario families and survivors want, and we're going to either augment or support the development of something like this. It kind of feeds in. You remember that many of these things are interwoven and connected. So cultural safety in hospitals is an initiative that's been, happening in Ontario, whether it's happening effectively, whether it's happening as often as we need it to. Each individual human being who walks into a cultural safety or cultural competency or whatever it is we're calling it today. I know it's shifted and morphed over the years, what we're calling it, but essentially it is a place where people can come and learn, to become allies, to understand the history, and to move and shift the way they do business so that racist tactics, policies, and procedures are no longer welcome in systems and in colonial systems that we also must share. Families, when asked about human security, they talked a lot about the challenges that they face. Even transportation, for example, there was a lot of those that were in the north that were sharing how dangerous it is because there is no transportation for them to get in and out of communities. Buses had stopped. Some of the Greyhound buses had stopped. People were resorting back to hitchhiking and so on. In the legal justice system piece, the advisors asked for a traditional justice system. They asked for more advocates and navigators for victims and families in the system itself. They also wanted support for those who have offended, navigators and advocates. Some of those accused or offenders are our men who were our boys. I think as compassionate women in the sector I work with, in the shelter sector, for example, we have always held up our men and looked for ways and means to support them. As I noted before, and this simply is my opinion, that industries, institutions, services, and partnerships, that's everything else. These are the difficult systems, those colonial systems, the challenging systems that we wish to indent and embed our efforts in, try to change and decolonize these systems. These were the four top solutions or four top pieces of advice that came from the families. This comes right out of the National Family and Survivors Circle. I didn't get into the meat and potatoes of each of those key recommendations or solutions that came forward from the families and survivors, but we can perhaps future forward, what do you do with something like this? How do you use this kind of a strategy as an advocacy tool? And how is it that we can align this with our work as we move forward? So let us come together in true partnership where the lived experience, expertise, and autonomy of families, survivors, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people are recognized and integrated into a decolonizing approach that confronts the challenges of colonialism and restores and builds upon Indigenous knowledge systems and laws. Past, present, and future generations are counting on us.
Sego, good morning. I know that you said some of the bullet points on the slides were self-explanatory, but I had questions on all of them, what was meant by them. The first one was, what it said, cultural safety training. What is meant by that?
Thank you. And you were the one actually that inspired me this morning to talk about prevention initiatives. Yesterday, you shared about culture and ceremony after the fact. So MMIWG, thank you to you for doing that. And you're the first speaker here, so serendipity. Cultural safety, it's a training that has been happening for many years, my goodness, 20 years. But essentially, cultural safety is a process of training that can be brought into any organization. It usually has embedded in it history. So the history of Indigenous peoples, often approached from a pan-Canadian approach, but it still gives the history and current circumstances of Indigenous peoples. So in this case, the cultural safety would be created in order for individuals in institutions and otherwise to better navigate their work and to become either allies or to know more about Indigenous peoples in Canada. If they're Indigenous, I've learned a lot. So cultural safety training is one of the things that advisors wanted to see embedded into those systems in order to decolonize them, that people needed to learn about Indigenous peoples before they could really advocate. So it's an initiative, it's not perfect. There are some really good training systems out there, in particular in the health sector. That's what's meant by that. They just want to see more of it, because although we are saturated at times in sectors, helping sectors with this cultural safety dialogue, it's still important because many, many, many people still need it. And I've seen and heard from people who have had their lives shifted by going through training, their lens, their lives, their worldview shifted through cultural safety training.
Yes, and it's interesting that you say that, and we're kind of maybe speaking a little bit to non-Indigenous organizations. But I have to tell you, even within my own organization, there is a great deal of work to be done, sensitizing our own people who come to work in our own First Nations or Indigenous organizations, because a lot of us don't know the history. A lot of us don't know the culture. And the other thing too is I always see this in like job descriptions or other documents in my organization, let's say the general personnel policy or other documents that we develop in our First Nations. Often it says that you don't go against the traditions and ways of your people. I have to tell you, a lot of young people are coming in not knowing what that is. You say, don't go, even in justice documents, it says don't break the norms or the traditions of your people. A lot of people don't know what that means. A lot of First Nations have kind of gone away from what those are. And so it's confusing, I think, to people to figure out what the norms are or what the norms of your culture are.
That's an excellent point. And I find as well that there's this insensible wherever you go, if you identify as an Indigenous person from a certain territory, you're supposed to know everything about everyone else, supposed to know everything about every other nation. And that's not the case. And I think that's important that we loop back to that. I do see some communities, I'll use Toronto, for example. I don't know if it's been done yet, but I've done some work in Toronto as a facilitator over the years. There are leaders in Toronto who are calling for a cultural safety process or initiative that really takes into account the history of Toronto. Who's in Toronto? Who's looping into Toronto? What does Toronto look like? What's our history as Indigenous peoples in Toronto? And how maybe those national or provincial impacts, colonial shifts and changes in policy and so on have impacted us. But really, who are we? And in communities themselves, if they took the time to do their own cultural safety training, would be quite an interesting endeavor. Thank you for your comments.
Sego, everybody. Good morning, Michelle. I'm so excited, so happy to be here. Very thankful. I'm thankful to Vincent Cook, who had just spoke, because a light bulb was going off in my mind as well. It was very challenging to try to list a top 3 because they're all interrelated with one another, right? I had safety and inclusivity in for my first number 1, but as I heard, Vincent, sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly, to my apologies, but asking what is cultural safety training, right? And I believe as we travel throughout territory that looks different among each community. But it definitely shifted my first response. I wanted to put cultural safety as my number one, but my number one was safety and inclusivity on and off reserves for all of our Indigenous people and our non-Indigenous people, because our families have also, weave that web of life within their families. So many families are diverse. I believe that cultural safety training, I'm feeling in my heart that it should be called something different, right? Because it's so diverse. That was my number one for this. But safety inclusivity was the number one. I believe when we reflect on cultural safety training, a lot of that has core values as Indigenous people. And what I'm finding a lot as a young, Native woman, a mother, is that the embracing of our families, the embracing of our loved ones, what does that look like in safety and inclusivity in bigger, in bigger aspects, in education, in the justice system, in the healthcare system? That safety and inclusivity is my number one, trying to use cultural training as a reflector point of our core values so that we can safely embrace members no matter where they're coming from, because they're coming to us for that guidance and for that healing and for that embracement for those who have gone through. So I just wanted to piggyback off of, I'm liking the discussion, I really truly am, and wanted to piggyback off of our first speaker and hoping that others will want to share too. Nawa.
Nyawa, Jillian Isaacs. So lovely to see you. We'll invite Elizabeth into the circle.
Ani Bonjour. It's so nice to see so many of you, my colleagues from work. And my sister Michelle, who's also my mentor, and she challenges me. So I'm really happy that she's here today. I didn't know she was speaking when I registered, so it's even more exciting. I think this exercise was challenging, even though it seemed very simple. In moments, in the snap of a finger, trying to prioritize what I, and being mindful of being urban in Niagara, and what does this look like for us here. But one thing that really popped out to me, given that we work in a friendship center, is those community-led solutions that seem to be really just there. And Michelle, you mentioned kind of that before, during, and after care. So I kind of wrote some things and what that meant to me, right? And those community-led solutions, that's where that before and during are very important. That prevention, but also having a connection to our community members and being able to consciously meet them where they're at. Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of words, but we'll hear out in the community words. They're just words, but we need action, and we need to know, I guess, where we're at and what we are capable of doing, and not going into work that you're not comfortable with, I suppose, but being on that journey of healing and knowing what you can handle. And honestly, I know that there are families here that have been affected, but we really do need to be mindful of where we're at, especially with that aftercare and caring for families that have gone through tragedy. So I just want to say Chi-miigwech for this exercise and for the presentation, Michelle, and I look forward to reviewing that deck later. And I see Barb had posted that for us. So miigwech.
Miigwech, Liz. I think for some of you, the bullet points mean something. They meant something to the people who shared with us. And they're not just a bullet point. This could become, this could blow up. We know what happens to bullet points when people put their energy, time, effort, and love into it. They blow up and they become something. So what I would encourage you to do, for those of you who may feel uncomfortable just popping it out there, some of you may think, this makes sense to me, I get it. Take a look at the report. Okay, the report has either been sent to you or it's online. It is the full 81-page document. And in that document, you'll see each of these cluster areas have been addressed. There's a narrative attached. In that narrative, we do ask for the challenges from the advisors, where they think that we could potentially trip and fall. And then finally, the alignments, which I think are critical for those advocates who are moving forward to secure funding or to move initiatives forward. This document will be a tool for advocacy for you. It may not be the only one, but it will be one in your toolbox as you proceed. And this is also the tool that the chiefs get to take to the tables with the government. This is pre-Treasury Board discussions, folks, not post, where they decide what's important for us. I don't think that should happen. I'm all about encouraging government to see us as partners. Okay, we've had for many, many years this relationship that has not been reciprocal. It has been a relationship whereby they are here and we are here. They're giving us the money, we kowtow to them, we're fearful of our funder, et cetera, et cetera. That has to stop, and there must be a relationship of reciprocal respect whereby the government recognizes you cannot do this work. This is not for you to do. This is for communities and organizations and individuals who are stepping into the fray to do the work. We just need you to do your part by giving us some money. And that money will allow us to do the work we need to do, but we know what is best. So I say this, and it sounds so simple, but it's not that simple when you're negotiating with a government who sees this relationship as linear as opposed to reciprocal and a partnership in order to deliver something or to shift or move something. And that connection, which is step side by side and not one of higher lower, we have to push that forward and create the opportunity for ourselves by virtue of using tools like this or going back to our community to say, what is it that you wish for, want, or desire in order for us to shift this narrative? Linda John.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Linda was one of the advisors that helped to develop this report. Yes.
Hmm,
Hello, lovely.
I didn't know I was going to get emotional. I'm very honored and thankful. And as I was preparing my day, I had begun to put my bundle in front of me, which are our traditional medicines and my gems, my candle lit for my loved ones as they are sitting with me here today. I can say, Michelle, this came to be a beautiful job. I mean, like, I'm sitting here and I'm like, wow, I'm there's some parts that, stuck out. And as you can, if not everybody knows that also too, I'm very proud to have my daughter, Jillian Isaacs, be with us today from Love Starts With Us from Six Nations, outside a partner with Minokaw. That is our home root. So I'm very proud and thankful that we are able to be a part, because I really believe that the grassroots people's voices and families is the best that you're going to get. And, we had a coordinator / counselor. She always said, use the meat and potatoes. Use my meat and potatoes, like, to go and bring forth. And I used to think meat and potatoes, but now I understand. And I am just so proud. And my heart goes out to what, and there were some things that come out and stuck out to when I can bring myself back to 2021. And I thought, wow, truly amazing, Michelle, for all who took part of this and created this to bring forth. I see some familiar faces on here and I'm just touched. I feel like my nose is running, like I don't want to disappear from my moment because I'm sitting here, and I thank you for that space. But I created that space as well here in my home and able to have the tools to take for ourselves to take care of us, for that self-love. I just wanted to say that this brings bravery, a vibration. This brings hope. This brings love, a lot of love. And that's all healing, and it's going to start, and we have to embrace in that. Miigwech, Nawe, I love yous, and I thank you truly from the bottom of my heart.
No, Linda, for that and the comment. I will tell you this. I've been doing work as a strategic advisor and facilitator for, I guess we could say, closing in on 20 years. This report is the most proud of in my entire career. And I'll tell you, it was hard won because I literally needed to see a therapist. I needed to see a therapist because I was opened right up. I tried to start the sessions, each session, with an opportunity to allow each advisor to share a story of their loved one that was a good, positive memory of them. And they did, but they also shared the tragedy that they encountered. Because at the end of the day, that's what brought them into that circle in the first place. Because they had a story to share, they also had some solutions to share. And that's what, Linda, being part of the sessions, I feel very thankful that you are looking at this work and feeling a sense of connection to it, because this tool is ripe and ready for our chiefs to take forward to the province and say, yeah, wait a minute. Okay, you have some gaps here evident in your report or your strategy. So let us help you fill those gaps. Or wait a minute here, we see some room for opportunity. And the province, their report is every single ministry that is attached to them. And anything they're doing for Indigenous peoples is embedded in that report. So there's some really good work happening in Ontario in one community or two communities. Let's see that spread. Let's spread the love. Let's move these really already amazing programs that are being created in communities. Let's see if other communities want to tag along with that. We need the funding. And federally, we have a federal government. We need the Assembly of First Nations to be at those tables on our behalf, advocating regionally. Okay. Our region looks very different than British Columbia or the East Coast. We do have some similarities. We have the colonial constraints that we all share, but each of our unique identities, even in Ontario, vary and shift. And I think a regional approach first that's sifted into a community-based approach is the most effective approach we can take in all ways. So I wish for the chiefs to use this tool and to move this conversation forward so that it's no longer a conversation, it becomes an action set of initiatives. Any other comments? Wanda, you're back. And Wanda, we said once you came back, I was going to remind you that you wanted to make a comment around the justice system piece. And thank you so much for your bravery. And I want to say I'm sorry for your loss. Even 20 years ago, I'm sure it's still raw. I appreciate your honesty as well and openness with us. So please go ahead, Wanda.
No, so quickly, I was commenting on the legal system, and I just want to say that it's really important, and I'm very happy to see that you included offenders, just because offenders are our people as well. So it's important that they get the support and the healing that they need, so that they don't offend again. So I really like that. What I had written down today, you kind of touched on a little bit, but I just wanted to add like what I thought were good solutions based on my own personal experience, not just from losing my mother, but also being a woman who lived a risky lifestyle at one time. So what I put was I know the three main influential institutions of the society are school, government, and media. And I heard you mention that. So under school, what I put a solution would be teachings on women, like how sacred we are, because the women, like we are our people, you know what I mean? Like we're the ones that give birth. Like we're important, right? So when we go missing and we're murdered, it affects like everybody. It's not just like that woman. It's just the men are affected. They're feeling down and out because they couldn't protect the women because that's their, like it's just such a ripple effect. So and then I put from kindergarten right until grad school. So like I don't care if you're going to school to be a doctor, like there should be some kind of teachings on there for the like our women. So that was what I wrote. And then for the media, I put the coverage, the length of coverage. I've been noticing that like a lot of non-native women, quote unquote, I'll just use the term white because that's the way I was taught, red, black, red and white. White women are getting like 1 hour's newsworthy when they go missing, and they're portrayed to be innocent, but then there's clips where they're in violent relationships. So like they're not highlighting the violence like they do with our women. Like our lifestyles that aren't so pleasurable are highlighted. It's not highlighted that we're daughters, that we're mothers, that we liked beating, that we like to power, like those kinds of things aren't highlighted in the coverage in the newspapers and on the news. And then I put, yeah, the content on TV. So what's exactly being said about the woman who's missing, other than, oh, she was last seen at, John and King. You know what I mean? So that needs to change. And then as for the government, this one's hard because it's the government. But I put like some little laws. It may not sound like important, but for someone being in jail, like my dad couldn't even call the jail and ask if I was in jail because they say, oh, we don't give out that information, which is BS. Like, how does he know I'm not missing or murdered somewhere? I was sitting in jail. I remember that. And I just kept saying, I got to call my dad. I got to call my dad because I didn't want him to think like something bad had happened. So I think that needs to change. Like, I don't know if it could be a next to kin or if we could have a professional, like a caseworker or somebody. But like, if somebody goes missing, I think that we should be able to know if they're in the jails, the hospitals, the detox, or shelters, and not have someone say, oh, we can't tell you that information. Click. I don't know how, but I just feel like that could be, that could help us, that could help us when our loved ones, we haven't heard from in a few days. And then lastly, I put in the police. I don't know if they have this, but I was thinking like an Indigenous missing persons task force. So it's something where like it's dedicated just to our people only. And then having that strong bond and relationship with the community and sort of knowing who is who, the police making more of an effort to get to know the people who are on the streets, and not even just the street people, but community people. That's it. Thank you.
Wanda AJ Jameson, where were you? Thank you so much for coming back into Circle, and thank you for sharing. And keep in mind, this report is your tool, is your pathway to advocacy for not just the chiefs, for the organizations and so on. So as you listen throughout the rest of this week, you want to look for places where you can attach some of the wise words that you hear from others this week to the connecting factors in this report and to any of the key messages that you'd like to either articulate in writing or to take forward as you endeavor to secure more funding and support for your work. Jillian, please, you have the last word.
I just wanted to say Nyawa Michelle for being an amazing woman of spirit and putting your love and your dedication and your commitment not only to women of the world, but to many, many communities. And it's so beautiful to see you. And it's awesome again to see Elizabeth and Rhonda and some Six Nations community members on as well. But I just wanted to just give thanks. I love discussion. I love sharing. I'm like, I don't want to piggyback off my mom, but I did want to just share a little bit ending words because my third after safety and inclusivity was my first. Cultural safety training was my second, but land and culture and ceremony, those all kind of fell on that access to land on my third. And I just wanted to share, I'm representing Love Starts With Us in Six Nations, MMIW families, and I'm very, very thankful to have officially be brought into the circle. A lot of you may know Linda John as my mother, but I just wanted to say, having my mom, it's been many, many years that she's been involved in the work of MMIW and MMIWG, Two Spirit Women. I was able to watch her on the side. I was able to be her support, and she would come home and she would bring the teachings from these conferences to our homes. And I do get a little bit emotional because we had little ones and now they are teenagers. And I just wanted to share what this work does when it is community led. And we have an amazing group, Love Starts With Us, women in Six Nations, that are supported by their community from many knowledge keepers and elders and Gunokosha, amazing, amazing organization. But as my mom was traveling to many, many gatherings, she would come home and she would share the teachings that would be happening. And even though there were many, many different nations and different ways of healing and different ceremonies on land, us being Haudenosaunee women, it was able to create an openness within her heart and within her spirit, so that when she come home, she find the tools that the children need, because we're not only representing one woman on here, but we're also representing a baby as well. She would come home and share these teachings, everything that she learned with her family. And we see the change. It's been 10 years and we see the change within our home. We see the change within our women, our young girls, within our family. And then to be able to be a part of a group by my mother, by my grandmother, by my auntie, all coming together to do this work for future generations. So I just wanted to say, when we share space with one another,
when it comes to healing, we go home and we shower that love into our home, to our children. And I think today I'm realizing that there's been tremendous change within our home and within our communities. And I'm just thankful to be here, and I embrace my tears. I truly, truly embrace my tears, and I'm thankful to be here. So now so much. And I have a candle lit for a loved one, but I also have a courage candle lit because I know it can be very, very difficult communicating virtually. So to anybody who are trying to find the words or trying to find their voice, trying to find the courage to share and to connect, I'm supporting you and I'm holding space for you through our fire element. So now so much, and I look forward to sharing and meeting the rest of the week. And now Michelle, now to the organizers. This was a great session.
Yeah, Jillian. I that's what it was, huh? That courage candle. I appreciate that very much. I thank everyone for the time that you gave to me, spending time listening to me. I'm not a rambler generally. I prefer to have exchange in my connection with people when I facilitate. But this was a mini presentation of a lot of work that occurred on behalf of families and others and organizations. And yeah, I hope that you enjoy reading the report, but more than ever, I hope you look at that report from the angle of strategy and you make things happen. So I wish you all well.
Now, Michelle, for that facilitation. It was so lovely.